the night that Riley died, and I'm not going to talk about the infamous text message and all that. A lot of the media, when they were talking with me, it was always um, that's what they wanted to talk about the most and how they wanted to open it up. I prefer to talk about the minute that I left. So, um, so I decided to go look for Riley on July 25th after that infamous text message. And I thought maybe he had gone to the beach. So Victoria was under construction, so I decided to go towards, I had to go towards Knowlton Road, and I turned left on Knowlton Road. And as I was doing that, I met the first responder vehicle. As some of you know, if not, I'm a first responder. I've been a first responder in the town of Brome Lake for probably for a little over 15 years. Haven't worked since last July, but I was pretty active. I worked probably 2 to 4, sometimes 6 times a week, especially in the last year. And I've been an active member. So as I crossed the first responder vehicle, I decided to turn around. She was coming up from Moeco, like I knew who it was. It was a Tuesday night. It's always the same people that kind of work, so I knew who it was. And I probably met her at Knowlton Packaging, and so I turned around basically at the relay, at the Four Corners there. So I turned around and went to the scene, and to the scene, and I didn't know it was a scene. So it probably took me 2-3 minutes to turn around and to get there. So when I arrived there, I saw her car, the first responder vehicle, and I could see her. I could see her performing CPR. So I knew that the person that was on the ground was dead. And all I could see were a lot of police cars. There's a lot of police activity going on, but it was eerily quiet. So there was no ambulance yet. So I really arrived quite quickly. I recognized one police officer, an SQ officer, Luc La Rochelle, and that's it. And so I went to go cross the tape or towards there, and said, I think that's my son. And then she asked me, it was a female officer. I could recognize her, but I don't know her name. And she said, well, why do you think that would be your son? So I proceeded to explain to her, Riley, and that, he's known to be depressed, even though he'd been feeling good that day. I said, I don't know. I got this text message, and, I go look for him and I find him. And that's it. And we hug and we kiss. And then she's like, well, maybe it's not him. And she's asking me, how was he dressed? And I was like, well, I knew he had a yellow shirt on. Um, so I was like, I don't know, yellow shirt. She kept asking me what he'd had for supper. And I was like, well, do you think I should call his dad? And she's like, well, we don't know if it's him. And, it would have been easy for me to go identify him. But, when she said, no, you don't want to see him like that, I kind of kept that in my head. And I was in shock, and I knew that the person wasn't alive, because you only do CPR if the person doesn't have a pulse. So I called Riley's dad, and it was most of you know, it's at a Four Corners type thing, and it was blocked off on all access. I'm coming this way, Riley's dad's coming this way. So he came with his girlfriend and came across the scene, and as he was coming, or like over here, and the scene's over here, I don't know if you can see that. And so he proceeded to come over, and I was in my car with the police officer, because she was like, let's go to your car and talk. And I had been giving her a declaration all the while, like, well, Riley's dad was on his way. And I talked and told her, remember some of the things, but I don't remember all of the things. I know she was asking me a lot about firearms. She was asking me about what he had for supper, and I was like, firearms, no way. We don't even hunt, and it's just not things that I have here. So I didn't know. I assumed maybe he had them at Riley's dad's, but I really didn't think that he had walked all that way. Like, if you know Riley, I was just like, there's no way he walked all the way there, in the middle of the night. So, that never crossed my mind. At that point, had assumed that he'd thrown himself in front of a car, seeing there were so many cars, and it was like quite bright, and I couldn't see really the people. I just saw a few here and there. So then I was still in my car with the police officer giving her my statement or my declaration, I guess. And I saw Riley's dad coming. So I got out of the car to join him. And this other police officer with a beard, was running, charging him, like screaming, "Hey!" And then I heard Luc La Rochelle said, "Hey, attention, c'est le père," like saying it was the father. So I guess at that point they had confirmed that it was really him. And I know like that he'd recognized his book bag because he could see it from that side, whereas I couldn't see anything. I was like, the first responder had her back to me, so I could see her doing the maneuvers, and that's it. So that's probably 15 minutes, 20 minutes, and we're outside talking about maybe what had happened. He's like, I just saw Wallace McGovern, and he said everything would be transparent, and those things were just like going in one ear and out the other. I was in complete shock. So the police officer that had been handling me, I guess, said, well, you can go to the hospital, because at this point Riley was leaving. And so Riley's dad went to the hospital, and he was screaming because the ambulance lights weren't on and they weren't moving very fast. And so I just knew, what had happened. And so she wanted me to go back into my car and sign that statement that I had given. I'm sure she reread it to me. I don't know. I gave her the letter that Riley left me. I just gave it to her. I trusted them that they were doing the right thing. I was trusting the police because we're told that we're to trust them, that they're doing the right thing, and I didn't know what had happened. Hindsight, So she's like, go get yourself to the hospital. And so I went home and changed a little bit, and you had to go around. I had to go around Tibbetts Hill. So I ended up at the hospital, and when I arrived there was a lot of commotion going on outside with Riley's dad and a female cop, SQ officer, and a nurse. And they were like, they want me to go sit in that room. I'm not gonna. She won't speak French to me, and it was just a lot of stuff. So if most of you know, when you go to the BMP, on the right is the emergency room, and then like you go straight is like the reception. So that's where I was like, well, why don't we go wait there, and then the doctor could come in and tell us what's going on. So we went there and waited probably 15, 20 minutes. So it's probably around 2:45 by then. Yeah, maybe, big maximum. And so 2:30 we arrived, about 2:45 a doctor, a nurse, and that SQ officer come. And Riley's dad says, I know what you're going to say. You're going to say he's dead. And the doctor said, yes, I'm sorry to say that your son is dead. And then he said, well, can we see him? And the police officer said no, because the cops are back there. So again, like, these aren't even things that registered to me at all. And so the police officer said, well, wait here and we'll be back to give you more details. And I was like, okay. So they go back there, and they start, so we wait. Riley's dad wants to leave. He doesn't want to hear anymore. And so I decided to wait. And there's no way I wasn't going to not know what was going on. So I waited, and then about 15 minutes later, so it was probably around 3 a.m. at this point, I had to go to the reception area, and not to the reception area, to the emergency area, to let the receptionist know that I was still waiting for information. And And for those of you who've gone there, the receptionist is there, and behind her is like the emergency nurses station, doctor's station, where everyone hangs out. And so she turned around to let them know that I was there, that I was still waiting, and the doctors and I could see the SQ officer like, oh, like totally like in shock that I was still there waiting. So they came out and put me in that little room with the cross on it, and to give me the worst news that I've ever heard in my life, and nothing that I was expecting to hear. Nothing. Nothing could have prepared me for this. Nothing. Riley, I'd known he was dead now for probably an hour and a half, and I still thought he'd thrown himself in front of a car, that it was really self-inflicted. I believed it. So we go into this little room, so it's me, and in front of me, directly in front of me, is the SQ officer. She's probably 3 feet from me, 4 feet maybe. It's a very small room. And to the left of her, to the right of me, is a nurse. And so they proceeded to tell me, so she proceeds to tell me what her position is there at the hospital. She's a liaison officer. Her name's Geneviève. And she's tied directly to the hospital, and her job is to let people know about tragedies and the circumstances of the events, and these like car accidents, domestic violence, all kinds of things that she was telling me. And she was really trying to garner my empathy, which she did, because I'm an empathetic person. And I really thought she had a pretty shitty job. So, so then she finished, showed me the phone that linked her directly to the hospital, that as soon as there's an event, that the only time that phone rings is if there's something that's happened at the hospital. So, yeah, I was feeling for her, and I was thinking she had a pretty shitty job. And so I said, all right, so what happened? And I will quote you. And she said, you really want to know? And I said, well, of course I want to know. So she proceeded to tell me that they had received a 911 call, and concerning a man that was dressed in black with a firearm, screaming in the town of Knowlton, in downtown Knowlton. And that when the police officers arrived, they gave him 2 commands. And due to a police intervention, your son died. I street. And I looked at her and I said, are you telling me that you shot my son, or that you killed my son? And she said, yes. So at this point, I decided to call Riley's dad, because, we both thought that the injuries, or his death, was self-inflicted. And I called him and I said, well, the police are the ones that shot Riley. And he said, those fuckers, I'm going to kill them. Not a nice thing to say. So I hung up the phone, said I would stop by on my way home, and that I was going to get a little bit more details. And so when I got off the phone, the Geneviève, the SQ officer, said, oh, don't worry about that. She's like, I hear that all the time, and I've actually heard worse. She's like, I understand. I understand where he's coming from, And I said, yeah. I said, and then I kept looking at her when she was talking to me, and she had Velcro, like Kevlar body armor, like right up to here, and like her boots. And I was like, you were afraid of my son, dressed like that. You were afraid. And she said yes. And so at this point, the doctor came in, asked me if I was all right. Because I was like, I wasn't getting many more details and I wasn't really sure what to ask. I was in complete denial or shock. And I just needed to get with Riley's dad, I guess. So, so I left the hospital by myself. I left the hospital by myself and drove to towards Knowlton, and I had to go around. And I had to go around Tibbetts Hill because there was a crossing there. And I remember telling that transport guy that was my son down there, that he's the one that had been killed. And I said, the police killed him. And he was just like, yeah, everyone was quite in shock. So I went to Riley's dad's house and we chatted for a bit, He was like, told me the BB gun was gone. He'd found a note. And so that was that. So we talked a bit and we cried a bit and we're like shocked and didn't really know what we were going to do and just knew that we had to go get our daughter because she was at a sleepover and it was coming around like 5 a.m. and it was important that we go get her. So I had to stop at Tim's because I knew her mom was working, or she usually worked quite early, and that's where Reagan was. So I had to stop and tell her. And so I begged her not to tell anybody what had happened. And so we went to get Reagan. And then we told her the worst news possible, that her brother had died. And that the police had actually shot him. And that we didn't know any details. So I went back home and Larry went back to his house. And it's probably around 6 o'clock at this time. So I called a few people. Called my mother. She called my sister. So they all started coming. Probably around 7 o'clock, 7:30. My timeline's really off because I didn't look at the time. I didn't think to record anything. And I've asked the BI, I've asked the SQ, I've asked a lot of people, regarding my timeline, like what time did I arrive and what time did I give my declaration, and I know what time Riley's death was, and he was dead on arrival. He was dead at the scene. But you don't do CPR on people if they haven't passed. So I'm gonna pretty much stop this one now because I want to talk about when the BEI arrived and when the media arrived and when I realized the impact. We were basically in shock that whole night. So it didn't hit us. It still sometimes today doesn't hit us. So thanks for watching. I appreciate your time, and if you want to comment or you have any questions, I'd really appreciate that you'd write them down, because once I get through the whole thing, if I'm sure you guys are going to have questions, so let me know.